Deltarune, man. The state of this game has been very interesting to say the least. It's Toby Fox's next big project after Undertale, a game with popularity that likely soared far beyond anything he could have imagined, a game that holds a special place in the hearts of many, including myself, a game that can make people burst into laughter from just a few notes. Again, these first notes. It's that. That game was very complete with what it wanted to be, but Deltarune seems to be a sort of sequel? Well, it's still not 100% clear. The name is an anagram of Undertale, the game features characters from Undertale, we got some of those leitmotifs from Undertale in there, the combat is very much an evolution of Undertale's, but it may not all be in the same world or continuity? It's a very clear follow-up to Undertale, but may not be a direct continuation. At the time of this video, we currently have 2 chapters of this game, and Chapter 2 only recently dropped. Chapters 3, 4, and 5 are all going to be released all at once, but that still feels like some time away. There's a lot of mysteries being kept by Toby about this game. Heck, Chapter 1 just kinda dropped out of nowhere in late 2018. No proper announcement, just a download for a supposed survey program. When this happened, I admittedly didn't check out the game. I loved my time with Undertale, but I think I was still in that phase where I didn't want to play games on my PC much, even if it could probably run a game like this. And maybe I was just waiting for when all the chapters would be complete, since I thought it wouldn't be too long until then. I finally gave Chapter 2 a go when it came to Switch, and then I became overly hyped when Chapter 2 was announced on that Undertale anniversary stream. That live stream, it really did hit different. In more ways than one. But now that Chapter 2 is here, I want to start properly talking about Deltarune. I know I did that video on the fan comic paper trail, but now I feel like talking about the game itself. For this video though, I'm just going to be covering Chapter 1, give it the full focus it deserves in the middle of all this buzz around Chapter 2, which we'll get to eventually. So yeah, that's what's about to go down. Let's talk about Deltarune Chapter 1. Yeah, that's what this video's about, as if it wasn't obvious already. When you're first starting the game, you're taken to this character creator. You can choose your hair, body type, legs, with most of them being the same, their favorite food, and pain is one of the options. Blood type, how you feel about your creation, it will not here. Yeah, this all feels very strange. You have this surreal background the entire time, and the text refers to your creation as a vessel. I mean, in Undertale, you could maybe call Frisk a vessel to experience its world, but that feels like a very soulless way to describe them, and this opening goes with that term. One of my favorite parts about this whole sequence is the music. It's got this strong, unnerving feeling to it. It doesn't take long to loop, but it heightens how ironically controlled you feel making this character. It really makes you think about who or what is in control during this whole thing. Well, after you get your character done, we just throw that in the trash. No one can choose who they are in this world. Instead, we start as the human kid, Chris, as they're being woken up by their mom, Toriel, who tells us it's time to go to school. When we get to class, we have to find a partner for a school assignment. I tried asking Temmie, but she already had a partner. A hard-boiled egg. Tem chose an egg over me. Our partner ends up being this girl who shows up late, Susie, and we both have to go to get more chalk for Alphys, our teacher. Everyone tells us how scary Susie is before we go with her, and yeah, I mean, her introduction honestly kind of is, and she threatens to bite Chris's face off. Chris, you've got a good mother. It'd be a shame to make her bury her child, good God. At least afterwards, she just mocks you more than anything. But after you both get to the closet, it ends up taking the two into this other world that's called the Dark World. Oh nice, we even got new clothes in our blue. You get attacked in this first area, leading to an escape sequence, and this is one of the coolest additions for Deltarune. The bullet hell dodging system from Undertale is also applied to segments of the overworld, with our hearts being the hitbox. It's a really cool way to make the overworld and combat feel more connected, while also adding more interesting design to exploration. Moving forward, there's this hooded figure who tells us this prophecy about the light and dark, and how balance between the two must be maintained, otherwise calamity would occur, with 3 chosen heroes that are destined to restore the balance, and go on this adventure to a nearby dark fountain in order to do just that. You know, probably very standard fantasy stuff, but the cutscene that plays and the music are really good. But screw that guy, Lancer, another new character, is in the house to show off that seamless battle transition with our first battle, where the track Rootbuster plays, which is such a catchy battle track. I love it so much. Oh my god, I'm obsessed with the track. That hooded figure is properly introduced to us as Rouse. That name is very much an anagram of Azrael, which I'll question later. Susie doesn't believe anything Rouse says about this legend, and heads off without us to find a way out of here. So now we only got Rouse beside us as this adventure properly begins to restore this supposed light and dark. Immediately we're given a combat tutorial by Rouse, which transitions nicely to talking about that part of the game. Now, like I said before, the combat of this game is definitely an evolution of Undertale's combat system. We have standard attacks where we time our hits right for maximum damage, and connect, where we interact with our enemies in a specific way in order to make them sparable, often based around the personality of an enemy type. The bullet hell dodging system also returns for enemy attacks, still really fun and keeps you on your toes just like Undertale. Unlike Undertale though, attacking enemies doesn't really mean much. You're encouraged by Rouse to spare enemies, but draining their health will simply make them run away. The only thing that really changes is a few small things that don't affect the larger story, so you don't have to worry about any sort of genocide brewing in this game. Yet. For how combat is different from Undertale, a really cool addition is grazing. During enemy turns, if you get near one of their attacks, you get this white outline surrounding your heart with sound feedback. This causes the newly added TP meter to increase in percentage. This is an absolutely brilliant addition. There's now this really cool risk and reward system when it comes to avoiding attacks. Starting to feel easy dodging some of these patterns, you can start getting close enough to build up some of that TP. The reason you'd want to fill it up is that it's basically a mana or SP equivalent. With a character like Rouse, you're able to use magic skills like a healing spell, which, speaks for itself, and pacifying, which is another form of sparing if the enemy is tired. Some actions later may also require TP to do, or the turn of your other party members if their icon is next to an act. Besides grazing, you can have a character defend, which lowers the damage they take, and fills up a portion of the TP. One thing I really love about how defending works in this game is that you gain the TP as soon as you select defend, meaning that in that same turn, you can immediately use it on a skill with another character. An easy example of this is defending with Chris and Susie, and then immediately having points to cast a spell with Rouse. This system also means you don't have to worry about managing any sort of special point system outside of battles. You know how in other RPGs you gotta restore your SP after using a ton in battle, either using your items or finding a restore point? This TP system completely cuts that aspect of constant management altogether, and in favor of a more streamlined experience, focus more on the battles themselves. It's really well done and keeps up the pace. Now while there's certainly a lot more factors at play here compared to Undertale, in Chapter 1, it feels about as simple for most fights. Many of the encounters will come down to just picking the correct act and then sparing. And I know that's how it works in Undertale, don't get me wrong, but in that game it was more of a challenge to assess the personality of an enemy, to know what actions will get them on their good side. Here it feels more clear-cut, specifically for standard enemy encounters. Maybe it could be because things are generally more forgiving, as health values are much higher than Undertale, and you have a healer right beside you. The super boss Jevil is definitely the best fight in the game though. He's pretty difficult on your first go, but for how you can defeat him, you gotta keep using hypnosis to tire him out until you can pacify him with Rouse. The challenge lies in how doing this requires a turn of your entire party and 50 TP to use. Jevil's attack patterns are also really hard to dodge and do a ton of damage. The fight basically becomes this risk and reward system of building your TP and using hypnosis whenever you're confident you'll survive Jevil's turn, without defending or healing prior to it. The only advantage being that his attack will be decreased for that turn. This fight makes fantastic use of this game's battle system, as it incentivizes managing your entire party as efficiently as possible, grazing and defending to build up that TP, and feeling like you're actively making progress against a boss, since pacifying bosses in these games was often a matter of surviving enough attacks. This fight really shows how awesome having multiple party members is, and those party members are also great in terms of character, so let's talk about them. We have our lovable boy Rouse as our most prominent party member in this chapter. He'll be with you throughout the whole thing. His design is also great. It's pretty simple but also really cute. He's a very nice and caring pal, very supportive and just wants to get along with everyone, even when he gets mocked by others. That kindness can end up being a bit of a personal weakness for him at points, but he does his best. He remains the same lovable goat boy for the whole chapter, but as for a character who changes a lot though, we have Susie. Susie is absolutely one of the most interesting characters Toby has written between Undertale and Deltarune. She's introduced as the bully character that can act really intensely, but by the end of chapter 1 becomes a reliable friend. A character arc like that ain't easy, since you basically gotta turn a character who acts like an uncooperative jerk into someone who's less of that, and a person the other characters trust, and make it feel believable. I think Toby does that pretty well. Once you get to the Dark World, she already starts moving away from being totally rude to Chris, and is somewhat more reasonable. They're both in a perilous situation that they don't really have control over, and it's not like she actually wants Chris to die. It's also cool that before Susie chooses to properly be on your team, she'll attack on her own in fights, and you have to warn enemies to avoid her if you want to spare them. A clever way of having combat intertwined with the story. I believe Susie does that scary act whenever she feels she's being crossed. She does it when she thinks you're gonna snitch on her for eating the chalk, and again when Lancer is standing in your way, but for that moment, she ends up breaking out of that character because it ends up having the reverse effect on Lancer, since he thinks it's cool how scary she got. That was honestly a pretty fun moment. Susie still feels like a character that fits with the others in this world. She's got that humorous and goofy side to her that many of Toby's characters have that makes them a lot of fun, and this only gets further heightened when she teams up with Lancer. You see, she has fun being rebellious with Lancer and getting involved with a bunch of random stuff. It's a good way of softening her up and makes that moment where Susie refuses to fight Lancer any longer feel like it was decently earned. Again, Susie feels like a very different character compared to anything from Undertale. Characters in Undertale had their arcs, but Susie definitely has one of the largest changes over this single chapter, and there's still a lot of possible directions to take her afterwards that I'm really interested in. I've been mentioning his name, but the last main character could be considered Lancer. He calls himself the bad guy as he tries to get in your way, but the character I'd probably compare him to the most is Papyrus. He acts as this force that gets in your way, but he's honestly pretty chill with your gang. The worst he does is send a few enemies at you one time, but besides that, nah, he just wants to mess around, and eventually joins your team pretty casually. He does also have a sort of arc where he becomes your friend like Susie, but his character is definitely the most comedic of the four, and that's where his strength really lies to me. This little guy can crack me up, and according to the recent Undertale anniversary livestream, they had a proper walking animation for him, but they didn't use it because him sliding everywhere is honestly funnier, and yeah, I agree, it's like... it's a stupid pose. Yeah, forget everything I said, I love him just for that. These four characters, Chris, Susie, Rouse, and Lancer, are basically the main focus of this chapter, but we still got a bunch of lovable side characters. Sham the shopkeeper, who has a very calm personality, but has this feeling of mystery behind them, considering their knowledge of the world and certain characters. On the opposite end, we got the Dude Rules card, the egotistical Duke of Puzzles who uses speech patterns that I guess are early English. He's only there in the final area of the chapter, but leaves a fun impression. Unfortunately, I can't think of him without thinking of this meme.
I'm making fucking mac and cheese, and nobody can stop.
The enemy designs are also pretty cool, especially the boss C around. Like, just look at them. They're adorable. The sprite designs, and just general visuals for that matter, have certainly increased in quality from Undertale. The sprite animations look awesome, the environments have a nice look to them, and it's a pretty game to look at, honestly. I didn't really have any major issues with the visuals of Undertale. I did like the character sprites when in battle, or for the expressions, but the environments were admittedly really basic. The music was what certainly carried the atmosphere, but Undertale also has one of my favorite video game OSTs ever, so you know what, that's a fair trade-off. Now the music in Deltarune, it continues to be great like Undertale's music. Field of Hopes and Dreams is such an amazing overall track that's brimming with this lovable energy. Rude Buster is fantastic like I already said, and the boss themes are bops. We got this new leitmotif going on for a number of tracks like Beginning, School, Friendship, and a bunch of other tracks, and I really love it as a leitmotif. I see it as having as much power as the leitmotifs in Undertale. To include Chapter 2 here for a second, the OST for Deltarune has yet to top Undertale for me, but that's an extremely high bar, and Undertale's OST is already complete. It'll still be a while before I can make a true comparison, but with how many tracks I already love, I think this OST will be one of my favorites. When this story gets even more developed, y'all know some incredible tracks are coming with that. Alright, story. Guess we should finally get to how this chapter ends. After the whole group properly unites, we reach the Dark Fountain with the king awaiting us there. Lancer tries to get him on our side, but that very much doesn't work, so we end up finding him anyway. Now this moment is kinda ruined for me personally, just for the fact of that stupid recording where me and my friends put a Hank Hill impression over the king, and it's so hard to unhear now.
They're alive?
With that aside, this is actually a pretty rad moment for how the stakes feel increased, and I love how this fight plays with your dodging area and moves it around. Feels like a super new way to create attacks, and shows how many creative things you can do with this dodging system still. How this fight ends can vary depending on if you spared enemies. If you attacked enemies, he'll be pacified and put to sleep by Susie. If you spared every enemy, you get this much more interesting result where the king gets overthrown by Lancer and all the enemies you become friends with. You also get to talk to all these characters one more time before you leave. Chris and Susie say goodbye to Rouse before they go back to the real world, but not before Rouse takes off his hat and reveals how he looks. Okay, is he Asriel? If he's not, how's he related to Asriel? Is Asriel even at college? I don't know, and we may not have a solid answer for a while. But, yeah, that's how he looks without the hat. The sprite ain't as adorable to me, but hey, he's still the GOAT. Our heart resonates with the fountain, and we're taken to a classroom with a lot of objects similar to what we encounter in the Dark World scattered about, such as a plushie that resembles Sham. The current idea I have is that the Dark World is still this other world. It wasn't just in Chris and Susie's head, but the Dark World is based on how the real world is like. You have all these different board games and table games in this room, chess, cards, building blocks. That was basically the theme of this world, which I thought was really neat. It's afternoon by the time we get back, so we completely skip school, but we agreed to come back with Susie to the Dark World tomorrow before we separate for the day. A nice note to end off with Susie for this chapter. In the last part of this chapter, we get to properly explore the tunnel that we got glimpses of at the beginning. There's a lot of different optional stuff you can do here, and it does have a really cozy feel to it, especially with the nice track that plays. You get to see a lot of familiar characters from Undertale here. You can have a chat with Alphys in the alleyway. Asgore still ends up divorced with Toriel, poor guy. And he has all these colored flowers kept like the hearts in Undertale. Well, hopefully he didn't kill any children to get these. It feels kind of nostalgic seeing all these new faces in a new game. Oh! It's still the new characters that I had the most interest in. Burley has the most smug and beautiful expressions humanity has ever seen, but it's Noelle and her dad, Rudy, that I found to be the highlights. You find Rudy in the hospital as he's currently suffering from some sort of illness, but he's still in high spirits. He calls you Christmas and says he'll kick Burley's ass. I love him. You first find Noelle with Rudy, and you can talk to her afterwards. She's a little bit put off from how much you want to talk to her, since Chris is usually a very quiet person, and questions why you visited Rudy in the hospital. I mean, it's not a bad thing we did, but it feels a bit like strange behavior. You can talk to her about Susie, where it's highlighted that Noelle basically has a crush on Susie. You know what? Good for you, Noelle. You'll maybe get a chance to shoot your shot next chapter. Once we get home, the last thing to do besides flush the toilet is go to bed. The final scene of this chapter is this cliffhanger where Chris acts completely outside of the control of the player. They violently rip out their hearts and throw it into a birdcage as they pull out a knife with their eyes glowing red. If you pay close attention, you'll also notice that you can move around the heart as it's stuck in the cage, showing that there's this separation between the player, represented by the heart, and Chris as a character that acts on their own without the heart. The credits song that plays at the end has full lyrics to it. It's called Don't Forget, and it's a song I think of most when it comes to this particular leitmotif that Deltarune has. The song has mentions of light and dark, and how when things become dark, there's a light that's specific to your soul, and that you aren't alone in that darkness. It's hard for me to analyze how this song thematically ties in with what happens in this chapter, besides the obvious connections between the Dark World and the Lightners, but one thing this song does tell me is that Deltarune has heart. This chapter was mostly playful fun, but it also had its moments of sincerity. It blends to create this pleasant feeling that lasts with the player. Not as much as Undertale, but that's okay because this is barely the first chapter. Deltarune is not the most incredible thing with chapter 1 alone, but it didn't need to be. I still loved it, and I'm so excited for the rest of this game. There are still so many mysteries and questions that have yet to be answered. I don't believe I know the full meaning of the song Don't Forget, but I can tell it plays into an emotional core for this game, an emotional core that I believe can make Deltarune something really special, a piece of art that breaks away from just being Undertale's successor. There's still a lot that can be discussed about Deltarune. Maybe I just barely scratched the surface with this video, but like the game itself, this is only just the beginning. Welp, that seems like a good place to call it for this video. If you enjoyed your time at all, subscribing, liking, all that junk would be very appreciated. I plan to make a video on Chapter 2 of Deltarune soon, where I'll even bring up things I left out in this video, but in the meantime, I've already made other Deltarune and Undertale related videos that you can check out here. With all that said, thank you so much for watching, and have a good day.